Hi, everyone. I am so glad you've come to listen to the show today. And if you're on YouTube, thank you so much. Please subscribe to this channel. All it does is it helps us get more viewers, and I really appreciate it because the more people that know about this show, the more people that will want to come on and share their story. If you know anyone who's had a marriage story or who has a book that could help my listeners, please come to me. Tell me about them. Let's get them on the show because I would love to have them share their story or tell us about their book so it can help other people. How else will people know about these amazing books if you don't hear about them through me or someone else? Speaking of books, I do this podcast, which I'm going to talk about, but there's a woman on that podcast who I adore. She's so smart. And I know she's got a lot of things to say, and I can't ask her this on the other show. So I said, I'm going to have her on this one, and I do. Let's bring her on right now. Her name's Diane. So, Diane, I am so glad you're here today. You have no idea. So, just so everyone understands, Diane and I met on a podcast done by Barry Shore, which started because I did another podcast for someone named Dennis Prager, and Barry heard it and invited me to come to this. However, I'm going to precede this conversation with the fact that I went through some crisis with my husband in 2012 and 13, and I had found your name and a book you wrote or something you had written, and so I was well familiar with who you were. So when Barry says, yeah, we're going to do this podcast, and I got my buddy Diane Medved, and I'm like, what? I'm going to be
Thank
on a
you.
podcast with Diane? Or a webinar or whatever we called it back then, and it's called Marriage with Joy. And I just remember being so excited that like I was being asked to be on a panel with Diane. I am honored and amazed. And what the heck just happened in my life? You know, this was not going to be my career, but here we are. So, anyway, you, my friend, are a wealth of knowledge. And every time we do our Barry
Thank you.
Shore Marriage with Joy webinar slash to become a podcast, you've always been the bright one of the group. You always say the smartest things. It's because you are
I appreciate
you're,
that.
what is your title?
I'm a clinical psychologist, but I'm not practicing now. So I'm mainly a writer. Writer is a good title. I like that.
Okay. Okay. And how
But I do
long were
have a
you?
PhD, and
Yeah.
I went
Okay.
to UCLA where I attended 11 years because I'm born and raised in LA, fifth generation from LA. And it was just a natural thing. My mom went to UCLA.
Hmm.
I naturally was going to go to UCLA. I didn't even apply anywhere else. I went there for my BA. I got teaching credentials, elementary, secondary, counseling credential, a master's degree, and finally a PhD at
Okay.
UCLA.
Yeah. Clear as day. If any of you ever get a chance to listen in to Marriage with Joy, you will see how brilliant Diane is. She always has the
I
smartest
appreciate that,
things to
Laurie. You
say.
know, the only reason why I sound brilliant is because I'm always asked first. So I get to say all the good stuff, and then I leave you to your devices, and you always come up with something brilliant also. So I'm
That's very
grateful
kind
to
of you.
you.
That's very kind of
Uh-huh.
you. And so I'm so glad we had this chance to do this by ourselves because everyone who's listening to this is facing a marriage that's struggling. The husband's left, the wife has left, and they're left going, ah, I don't know what to do. I need tools because I don't want a divorce. I don't want my family to split apart. And that's the whole reason we have Marriage with Joy is to build families and keep them together. But my goal here today is to get as much information from you to share with the listeners so that A, they're maybe enticed to get more from your books, or B, just to make them smarter and feel more comfortable on their journey because this is a tough journey. So my first question to you, have you
Yeah.
ever had any clients back in the time when you were taking clients that you dealt with people who were going through a midlife crisis?
Well, let's put it this way. Most everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mainly because I have two books. This was my first one, The Case Against Divorce.
That's
Thank
what I
God it
read.
was a bestseller and it's still selling. I'm grateful for every check I get every 6 months. And then in 2017, I wrote Don't Divorce, which I found out was really kind of a mistake to call it
Why?
that. Um,
Why?
First of all, nobody wants to be seen reading a book that says don't divorce on it,
Yeah.
um, because it's advertising if they have problems. Nobody wants that. I should have called it Stay Together or something
Okay.
more positive. It was a mistake to call it this. But what it is addressed to your clientele, people who are having marital problems where one person is decamping or withdrawing or unfaithful. And what should the other person do? Ideally, I talk at length about how children are a major factor, and that when children's lives are at stake, meaning they're in the home and they will be impacted, and no matter what the age, they will be impacted. I think it's really much more crucial, even to try and save the marriage. If there's no children in the home and there never were children with the couple, it's much easier to sever a relationship and start again. People even call that a starter marriage. So I talk about why marriage is valuable in either case, why marriage gives you a lot more back than you give. It should be 100%, 100%. It shouldn't be 50-50. It should be 100,
Hmm.
100. But the point is that marriage is valuable and it's precious and you've invested in it, anyone who's already married. And so to tear it apart is going to leave traumas and breadcrumbs of traumas for the rest of your life. And I talk about that. And I talk about what you can do to put these things together and how you can combat the common excuses or reasons people give for leaving your relationship. So, I mean, I have a lot of ideas in there of what to do and how to combat what seems to be inevitable. And I admit, I have a whole chapter about when divorce is inevitable. First of all, anyone who's abused, mentally or especially physically, anyone who has been abandoned, because there are many cases of marriages. That was my clientele basically. After the
So let me ask you a question. What is the number one reason that people say they want to get divorced? That you found?
well, there are many parallel reasons that people give. In a lot of cases, someone's found someone new, and that is not to say, as you, the wife expert, know, that the person that they are cheating on is in any way inferior or a bad spouse or has done something wrong. But lots of times people are just attracted to someone else and the other person seems magnetic and they go for it. And in so doing, they betray their marriage. So that's a big chunk of people. And you talk about midlife crisis, it can be any time. It can be any time. You know, we used to say the 7 year itch. It so happens that I, in my studies, found that multiples of seven are very common. Don't ask me why. I think it's possibly because people just are doing the same old, and somebody new is exciting and thrilling and renews feelings of worth and value that maybe people are declining in after 7 years of marriage, 14 years, 21 years, 28 years. So that's a big chunk of people. Another chunk of people are incompatible. They are just always clashing, they're screaming, they're fighting. That is about a third of the cases of where there's children. In fact, I have to mention that in 2/3 of the cases where there's a divorce, the children are flummoxed to hear that their parents aren't compatible and aren't happy. In other words, it's you better sit down, kids. You know that song by Sonny and Cher? You better sit down, kids. We've got something to tell you. And the kids go, what do you mean our family's falling apart? What do you mean there's a problem? So only 1/3 of the cases are the kids aware that there is this kind of head batting. In those cases, it's not a surprise for them. And in a way, it can be a relief in some cases. So there's that. And then another group of people don't value marriage. They don't value their commitment. They see marriage as something that while it's working for them, they'll stay in it. If it's not working for them, it isn't like we're in this as a family project, which I talk about in my book. Instead, they say, it's not working for me. We might as well just throw it away. So those are three big categories. There's a whole bunch more, um, but maybe Laurie, you recognize some of those.
Yeah, I do. So what do you say when someone is in, because you think if you first got married and you're screaming at someone, why would you ever have children with them?
Lots of people want children for themselves. They want to have a family. They want to have that because you can't take children away from someone. Children are forever. And there are so many people who plan their lives around the idea that they're going to have children and they want to have children. And if they're married to somebody, they have an opportunity, whether or not they see that other spouse as their partner for life. So
Hmm.
that
So
happens.
do you think some people will go into marriage and say, I'm just gonna be married just to get kids out of this guy and then I'm gonna leave? Like, do you think that
No, most
happens?
no, I don't think people are that that cynical. I think what they do is, however, I love this person. It's feeling good. It looks like it's going to work. I'm going to make this declaration, this commitment, and have a family. And they get in there, and it's just, I mean, very few people are batting heads a lot before they choose to get married. They choose to get married because they're not batting heads, because they think that it is going to work. Marriage is a big commitment now, and you don't need to do it. And the fact that you don't need to means that the ones who do it usually feel it's got a good chance of being a good situation for them. I mean, everyone has their own values, but that's the problem. The values have changed. Everyone should not have his or her own values. Marriage should be something that is central to our identity, and people don't have that, which allows them then to say, okay, I'll throw it away.
Because they haven't identified themselves in a part of a marriage that's something that's going to continue. Do you think a lot of it has
Mhm.
to do with their parents?
Sure, absolutely. The peak
Do you,
year for
yeah, go
divorce
ahead.
was 1981, and that means that a lot of people who are adults now come from divorced homes. And if you don't have a model of two loving parents, then you see marriage as something that is less than that, different than that. And that is not necessarily your ideal because children learn what they see. And so people who come from divorced families don't have that advantage. It's a huge advantage to have two loving parents that stay together and are committed to the relationship. It's a wonderful thing for a child to have, but there's a lot of children and now a lot of adults who don't have that advantage. So, yeah, absolutely. What your parents did and do is very much impacting how a child then behaves as an adult.
Do you think in today's world, because I read somewhere that the divorce rate is actually kind of high again since COVID. Have you heard that?
Well, it's because fewer people are getting married. So when you look at it as a percentage of people who get married, yes, the divorce rate has climbed up to 50%. It never used to be. But now that so few people are getting married and they're living together, then yeah, the divorce rate is back up to 50%. But again, it's a whole different configuration because so many fewer people choose to get married.
Hmm. Yeah, I wonder what's going to happen. What do you think is going to happen? That's not why I'm calling you, but, or that's not why you're here, but now that we're here, what do you think is
You
going to
know,
happen?
you know, I see, unfortunately, a lot of people are not identifying with sources of values that they used to choose. And we supposedly have a pandemic of loneliness. And when people are lonely, they grab onto someone else. Why do they have that? It's because we're not identifying with groups. We're not identifying with religion. There's a lot few people who are choosing to identify with organized religion. We're not identifying with community groups like the Kiwanis Club and the Eagles and all these groups that people used to form to have a sense of community. We're not identifying even with casual groups in our jobs. It used to be a job was something that you stayed in for years. Now we've got recruiters who come and pluck us out of jobs into another one. We see where we are as a stepping stone to something else. So much more alone and independent. And that causes us to see marriage that way too. So I think that's a problem. What's going to be the future was your question. Unless we can start to rebuild. Now, look, I don't think that just because the pendulum swings one way that's bad, that it can't swing back to the good. And I think that we're seeing that in certain corners. We're seeing some people getting very committed to their religion. We're seeing some people trying to build community. We're seeing some people moving to a place where they're going to latch on and stay rooted. That's something that changed for a while. So I think that we can move from the bad side into the good side. I don't see it happening yet because we still see all these indicators of lack
Mm,
of cohesiveness. And that's why marriage is so important. Because if you don't have a spouse, if you don't have one person with whom you share life, who you consider to be your soulmate or at least your partner in the world, then you're going to be really lonely and you're going to keep looking for this in all kinds of places. I mean, now we look for a spouse even on a dating app. And do dating apps tell you very much? I mean,
everyone
I think they
lies.
work. I mean, maybe they do, and that's the problem, is that we need to find ways to meet and hook up where we have commonalities, where we have things that we can really build on, where we have shared experiences. And dating apps, I mean, I think they work for a lot of people, but I wonder if those marriages are any more or less likely to be lifelong. I don't have
Right.
that data.
Right. So I'm trying to flow with you, but like in India, I have a lot of Indian friends who are from arranged marriages, right?
Right.
And they've stayed
I have a
together.
whole chapter about it in
What do you
Don't
tell me what you
Divorce.
think about that? Can we talk about that? What do you think about
Well,
that?
I I talk about it as an example of how shared values and trust in those values allows you to come together. So Indian people, they don't just get arranged and then that's it. They get hooked up with someone and then they come together and they see if it works. If it works, then maybe they continue with that and they do get married. If it doesn't work, they go back to square one. So it isn't like it's set in stone. It's like, well, we see you have these values, and we know another family that has the same values, and our values are all the same. And so this is a good start. It's a
Mm-hmm.
good place to begin. So we'll hook you up and see if it works. Lots of time it works, and then they stay forever because they only have a 2% divorce rate among
Crazy.
Indians. That's
Crazy.
crazy. It's crazy because they have the value that a commitment is a lifelong commitment. And they're
Yeah.
both willing to sacrifice their own personal desires and needs moment to moment for something bigger. And I think if we could get back to that as a broader American value, it would help marriages.
Hmm. That's a hard one to convince people of. Wait, you want to have me sacrifice me? I just had today, I had a husband say, "Wait, I really want to get divorced." He wants to get divorced. He's like, I am trying to solve what I want to do with the rest of my life." And it was like, "Wait, what? Like, don't you have three kids and a wife? Like, what do you mean my life? Where are you going?" Cuz
So, what
they
did you
don't
tell him? What did you tell
well,
him?
it wasn't me. His wife sent it to me because he keeps saying, "Let's file for mediation." And I have things I tell the wives, and she was like, "He's badgering me." I'm like, "This isn't a badger, but it is kind of weird because he's like my life." And I'm like, ah. And we get there, and I think everyone's there. It's not about a we anymore. It's about me, my life, my needs. I'm getting married to you because I feel good when I'm married to you. I like my life when I'm married to you. It's never about like, well, what am I going to give you? Are we going to accomplish something together? What do you think about that?
Exactly. That's what I call the family project. If you go into it seeing it as a lifelong project where you're going to create a home and a family and raise happy children and be happy all along the way together with your spouse, that's a whole different way of looking at it than what you just described.
The Family Project. That's what you should call that book. Maybe
That would
that's
have
the next
helped.
book.
That would have
I
helped.
like that. Because that would be like, okay, we're getting married because we're upholding our family project. And don't you
Hmm.
think like today, like I asked some of the girls I coach, I'm like, so what are your core values? And they're like, what is that? Like they don't know. And then even younger kids who are on their phones all the time, we talk about this on our show, like they don't, you ask them opinion and they don't have an opinion. So if you don't have an opinion about what you want or where you're going, how can you get together with someone else?
Yeah,
What do you
because
think
you
about
can't
that?
compare what you think with what they think, because probably neither of you can verbalize what that would be.
Yeah,
It's
and just
sad.
thinking what you just said makes sense if you put two young people together and say you're going to be married forever, figure it out on that island with no TV or internet. Maybe, right?
Well, that's why people aren't getting married. They have now, it used to be that marriage was something that you do, you finish high school, you go to college, you meet your spouse, you get married, and then you set off into your career. Now people don't have that same mindset. What they do is they go to college, they get set up in their career, they change jobs a couple times, they have a circle of friends from their sorority or whoever, and then they may, after that, see marriage as a possible step or not. You know,
Mm.
having kids now is optional. It's just as good to have kids. It's no different if you do or you don't. And I think that's a problem too, because as people age, they start to realize that there's only a window in which they can actually have kids. And then after it's over, they start to get desperate. And that's why there's a whole fertility industry. And a lot of people end up not with kids and they're regretful. So
Are
that
they?
doesn't help them
Okay.
either.
Have you seen that or heard that?
Yes, and yes. Oh, yes. I know
What?
people who stayed, they go with somebody for a long time and then they break up with that person all through their 20s. I can name you several cases. I won't, but I could. Who go with somebody through their 20s and then they break up. The guy, usually. The woman is looking to stay with the person. Usually the guy is the one he breaks up and he goes with somebody younger. And the woman's in her 30s already looking for somebody, but all the guys are already taken and she can't find anyone. She goes from one to the next, and none of them really are as good as the first guy that they spent their 20s with. Or maybe they go again with somebody else for another 5 years. And here they are now 35, 36. Well, then what do you do? Because there's not as much of a pool from whom to choose. And so they end up missing that opportunity, not getting married, having a career, having
Mm.
friends, but missing that huge chunk of life that they really wanted to have. And all they can do is try and console themselves and be with their friends and say, I'm a happy person, but they're still missing that. And they admit it and they know it. And it's pressure and it's problematic. And there's nothing you can do.
Yeah, that's so sad. And I think that's going to happen more and more with all these kids saying, I don't want kids. I don't want kids. And then they'll get to be past the date and be like, oh no. And what about people thinking they're going to have their own family and be, well, I don't need a husband. I could just have my own baby. Have
You
you
know
heard about
what?
those people? Yeah, tell me.
I've seen that, but not very often, because most women want to have a soulmate with whom to raise children. You don't want just, a sperm donor. Then you're stuck your whole life alone. Who's going to marry you now that you have some sperm donor's kid that they have to now support? It makes
Hmm.
you less desirable and makes it less likely that you're going to find a spouse. So that's a problem. And men, on the other hand, they can go to younger women. Younger women don't mind if the guy's 10 years older. That's really not fair. It's sexist, but it's reality. And I think men and women have to recognize it, ideally, do what they can to combat that. But each case is an individual case. It's your life, and you're going to live it. And unfortunately, people get to a point where they decide to explode it, as you see with your divorce cases, where somebody's just taking off. It's like, now what do I do for the rest of my life? And I know
Yeah.
I'm glad there's you to help them.
Yeah. So when the husband or the wife bails because they think there's something better or there is something in their lap ready to go, the person left behind is really struggling. Do you see any, tell me stories or anything you've read or heard, or not read, but experienced in your practice where someone has had regret for doing the leaving?
Most of the time they don't. They
They
won't
don't
admit
regret
it.
or they don't leave? Oh, they won't.
Well, okay, the thing that everybody says, if they had children from their marriage that they leave, they say, I don't regret my first marriage because I have these three beautiful children, because everybody loves their children and they're always happy to have had their children. So they say that. And then they say, and it was so exciting to have that affair. And now I've moved on and I've learned and become a better person. It's that old, when life hands you lemons, you make lemonade thing. And the one that's left behind goes, well, now I'm a stronger person and now I can move on. I mean, people don't want to look at their life and say, I blew the whole thing. What they do is they say, yeah, that was a bad time. Yeah, it was awful. Yeah, my kids are hurt. Yeah, I wish we'd stayed together. But now I see what kind of guy he was. And so it's a good thing I was able to build my inner self and move on. And I still have my kids. And now I get to travel. People tend to be as optimistic as they can. You don't want to live your life as a glass half empty.
Mm-hmm.
So, do they regret it? Yes. In fact, that's the opening of my case against divorce. It's like when you start to talk to them, everything's great and they're really strong and everything's wonderful. But when you start really probing and you start talking to them after, a few sessions or whatever, you see them, you start hearing that regret. And you know that they wish that they'd just been able to stay in their marriage and be loved, but they weren't loved.
What is the
And
trick there? Is the
what do
trick
you mean, the
waiting to be,
trick?
so not the trick, but what is the lesson to be learned, let's say? Like from these people
From
who, from the regrets.
the lesson, the lesson is usually hard on the person who's left. It isn't a lesson anyone should have. And the people who leave don't usually want to see that lesson. And what
Mm-hmm.
is the lesson? The lesson is you can blow it. You can blow your life by going after something that's temporal, that feels good in the moment, that is exciting, that is, I'm finally alive. You can blow it. And nobody wants to hear that. I think, however, people need to talk about it and people need to realize that marriage is precious, and being in a bad marriage or even a boring marriage is not necessarily the end of the marriage. It can be revived, it can be revitalized. People can change. People are changing all the time. When people get married, they think they've got, the best person in the world. And then what happens? Well, then they start to unravel or they start to do something else or this or that. People change. They change for the worse. And that's what pulls you apart. They can change for the better and you can come back together. But people don't hear that. Like, if you've got problems in your marriage, don't leave. If you've got problems in your marriage, fix them. And it could be you who has to change. Who wants to hear that they have to change? It's always the other person. She's this or he's that, and they did that, and the other person. You both have to change to come back together. The hitch is you have to both want to be there. And you see the cases, and I saw plenty of cases where only one person wanted to be there. And if the other one's out the door, that one who's left can't have a marriage alone. So there's a lot of problems. We have to start educating people from when they're little kids that marriage is something to treasure, that marriage is something that's important. And even kids who come from a divorce home would benefit if they hear that. And if they see at least some happy marriages in their lives. If mom and dad broke up, if the grandparents are together, then that can be something that's a stabilizing force that they can look toward and say, not all marriages break up. And so we have to talk about how wonderful it is when people do stay together and how we need to learn to solve problems. with our friends, with our spouse, with our siblings. We need to learn to solve problems, not just leave, but solve them, and that's something I have to say, this idea of having space or having time out, while it's useful with little kids, it's not a skill that helps you solve problems. What that basically does is help you run away from problems.
Yeah.
And I think we need more discussion of coming together when we're having a problem. You can say, right now, I'm really, really angry and I need 5 minutes, but I'm coming back in 5 minutes. I'm not just going away and forgetting this. We're coming back and we're going to talk about it because I'm just not rational right now. Okay, 5 minutes. But don't make it, till next week and let
Or
it
next
disappear
year.
and dissipate. Yeah, next year when it's already embedded in the fabric of your hatred. That's a problem. But I mean, you can get angry. People get angry. But I have to also say, anger is a bad thing to have.
Mm.
Anger, Jewish tradition teaches
You're
that
Jewish.
anger, I'm Jewish and I observe, and it teaches that anger and arrogance, two A's, are two emotions you should strive to eliminate. Anger and arrogance. Now, arrogance is what makes you think that you should be pursuing what you like and that what you want is, above, head and shoulders above what your family or your kids or your wife would want.
Mm.
Anger is also something that is self-destructive. Being angry at someone else, you're putting blame on someone else. If you can just not have that feeling, work on not having that feeling, saying anger is hurting me, and just take 10 deep breaths and say, I'm going to try and see the situation from the other person's perspective. I'm going to try and put myself in their shoes. Even as simple as somebody cutting you off as you're driving, road rage. Who ever heard of road rage when I was a kid? Nobody talked about that because people, frankly, they were generally more charitable and less selfish. And arrogance and selfishness are the same dimension. And anger and placidity and calmness and peace. Everybody wants tranquility. Everybody wants to meditate. And yet they can still get angry when they're driving and somebody cuts them off and starts swearing. What good is that? Or
Yeah.
somebody cuts you off, gets in front of you in the grocery line and you start. What good is that? What that does is reinforce your own selfishness and stop you from learning communication skills and skills that will help you be more calm. Everybody wants to be calm, but not everybody wants to give up their anger. And
What do you
I
think
think,
about what's the difference between anger and resentment, in your opinion?
well, anger is more explosive in the moment, is more having to do with an incident that occurs. Resentment is a more global, a broader kind of emotion that builds up over a series of different incidents and things that happen. And if you resent someone else, usually that's also a kind of jealousy. Um, it depends on how you define it, but I can imagine I resent that other person because they have what I don't have. The 10th commandment: you should not covet what anyone else has. You should be, who is a happy man? Someone who is content with his portion. And resentment usually is something that's built up and it has maybe something to do with what someone else has or does that you don't. I don't know. Do you agree? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. I just hear, women saying, "Oh, my husband's so resentful towards me, and that's why we will never be able to work it out." And I'm like, "Why? What?" It's in line with anger, but it's deep seated and it's been taking on legs for a long time.
Hmm.
And it's
But do you ask them, what does it mean that your husband's resentful to you? What does that mean? Because if someone said that to me in a session, I wouldn't understand it. And I would try and tease out, what is resentment? What do you mean he's resentful to you? Is this something you
so
observe? Why?
this is part of, like, the bullshit of why they're leaving. Because I always say, when a husband goes, I need space, it means I have another girlfriend and I need time to go date her. So that's kind of that. And so if it comes to a conversation of what they're mad at when they go to therapy and they're angry, and the therapist will say later to the spouse, oh, he's really resentful because he did all the diapers and the dishes for 20 years when you were doing something, were you just sitting on the couch? And she's like, I was like, what? I have 4 kids. I'm not sitting on the couch. So it's lies, it's lies of resentment, of anger, you know. I think it's the case a husband will build against his wife for the reason he wants to leave the house.
I think you're right.
So
Yep.
it's unfortunate. So going back to your book, because I'd love to have another little snippet out of there if you can share anything with us ahead of time. The case against divorce. What's one that you can share with us? From the top of your head, do you
Um,
remember? I know you write the
no,
book a while
I
ago. You're like,
remember,
I
believe
forgot.
me. No, no, I don't forget this. Um,
I read that
what
book. It
can
was
you do?
amazing. In fact, I was looking for it earlier so I could show you how much in tatters it was because I
Why, thank
highlighted
you.
it, circled it, and I think I passed it to somebody.
Thank you. I appreciate it. This is a hardcover, but you probably have the
It's a great
paperback.
book. It's a
Thank
great
you.
book. Great
It's
book.
still available. I have at the end as an epilogue of Don't Divorce, which actually is really good because it's updated and it's got a lot of really practical things to do. Is that
Okay.
couples who are in a space where one of them is like trying to leave and the other one wants to save the marriage, they can do what I call the no dumping zone, have an experiment for a week in which
Hmm.
they do two things. One is they win by letting go. In other words, they don't talk about all the things that cause resentment or any of the problems between them. They have a no dumping zone and they're winning by letting go intentionally. They both say to the other, okay, I'm going to let go and give this marriage a chance. Now you see the people, and I saw a lot of people where one of the spouses would only do that to check off a box and was not sincere and really didn't want to do it. But there are some cases whereby a spouse can try these things, even with only one person. Winning by letting go. Okay, let go and accept the other person. Accept them and give them the kind of relationship at home that is attractive to them and not tense and not stressful. So, winning by letting go is a way that you can do also arguments. You start to get in an argument and you can just verbalize, okay, our relationship is bigger and more important to me than this argument. So I'm going to let go and you can have whatever it is that they're arguing about. And ultimately, the other person might go, what? She's giving in? What? She's saying that to
What?
me?
I want to move a second wife into the house? What? You're okay with it? Oh.
Well,
Sorry.
that doesn't happen
I'm just
because
kidding. I'm
usually they
totally
got their
kidding.
thing. But let's say that she goes, this marriage is so important to me. You want this other person. You're going to get her either way, and I'm not going to stand in your way. I'm just going to pause, just put my feelings on pause. I'm hurt to the core. I feel betrayed. I will acknowledge that, but I'm going to put that on pause so that we can have a relationship right now. Okay, so that's winning by letting go. And then the other one that I tell people is behave as if you were happily married.
Hmm.
Behave as if you were happily married.
So
In other
what would
words,
you? Yeah, good. Yeah, I'm
if
gonna.
you're resentful, you're not going to come to your spouse in a lovey dovey way. But if you're happily married, then you accept that your norm is love. Your
what
norm is that you relate to each other.
what do
And
you
so
tell
if
the?
you,
Oh, keep going. Sorry, I keep cutting you off. Keep
so
going.
I was just going to say that if you and your spouse can agree to have a period of time whereby you do those two things, winning by letting go, in other words, no arguments, and behaving to each other as if you're happily married, if you can do a week of that, he, okay, if he's got somebody else, he'll feel so guilty he won't feel good about it. And secondly, you can start to just a tiny little dot of rekindling what you might have had earlier in your relationship. Because at one time, you were happily married. At one time, you did have a good relationship. At one time, you shared. You shared your lives, your aspirations, your support for each other. You had that. And if you can try and rekindle what you actually had, this is not a fantasy, this is what you had. Sometimes I tell couples, I used to tell when I did therapy, get out your wedding album and look at those pictures. And who were those people? Because those people existed, those people loved each other, those people had a commitment ceremony and said, I want to be with you for the rest of my life. Now, something along the way sort of broke that up, but that doesn't mean that those are not you. Those people were you. And if you choose to have that kind of relationship, it's possible. It's possible. Now, things get in the way, of course, and that's something, a learning process. Most of marriage is education, teaching people how to be a good spouse, a good wife, but how to communicate. A lot of people go into marriage and they don't know how to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can be educated on how to speak to someone with respect, with patience, with calm, then A, you'll feel better, and B, that other person's more likely to respond.
Mm-hmm.
So you can rebuild a relationship. And anyway, those are a couple things that
Yeah,
I
I love
offer.
that. I was going to ask you because have you ever had a client say, "Yeah, but I can't do that because that's not authentic. I don't feel like it's not true."
Okay, fake it till you make it. It's a Jewish principle that you do the behavior and the feeling follows. By doing the behavior that you would like to behave in, then your feelings will eventually come along with it and you will be authentic. So if you want to be that person who doesn't get angry, be that person, even if you're angry. And eventually, your anger will not be the automatic response. You will train yourself just by practice, just by experience, not to be angry. And then you'll be a better person anyway. In that situation, your marriage, or anywhere with your children, whatever, if you're not a yeller, if you're not an angry person. Now, a lot of people say, oh, I was raised in a home where my parents yelled. Yeah. So you want to be
Mm-hmm.
like that? Yeah. Okay. Does that mean that you have to be that your mom? You know, people just come up with these excuses. And I
So
think
funny.
those excuses should be dissected. And
Yeah.
they should be, okay, is this what you want to be like? And people, faced with that, okay, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It's they all they it's almost like a crutch, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's my reason. It's my reason why I'm like this. And I can't change that because I was born in that family. And so that's the way I have to be. I'm powerless. But they weren't powerless before. They weren't powerless when they chose to marry that person. They weren't powerless when they had that child and they, are taking that on as a lifetime project. Are
Mm-hmm.
you
That's
powerless?
right.
You don't have to stay in your job. You don't have to do this. You have a choice. And every day that you stay married is a choice. And every day that you wake up and you smile at your partner, if the first thing you do is smile at your partner, then you will change your whole day and your whole relationship with your partner. Just that one thing. Just the first time that you are aware that you're awake and your partner's there, if you smile, that will change
Mm-hmm.
your life.
So what would you tell to people whose husbands are having an affair and the husbands are saying, I want a divorce. I want out of this. I don't know what I want. Besides getting your book, what other thing would you tell them?
That's what my book discusses. I mean, it's like, do you go along with it? No, no. If you don't want the divorce, then you should say that. You should say, our marriage is precious. I made a commitment. I still love you. I think we can fix this. I think that we've got, now, if they're having an affair, that's powerful. That's powerful. Because he's going to say, but I feel alive for the first time in 10 years. But this is such a great relationship. Okay, but you know how many cases where they leave the marriage, they leave the children, and then they go to this person and that doesn't work out? I mean, you've probably seen that a million times,
all the
is
time.
that, they screw up their life and the wife has been betrayed and hates him now because he abandoned the whole effort. And he goes over there to her, and then she either dumps him or he's tired of her, whatever it is. He doesn't have a family with her, he doesn't have a big commitment to her, and she could leave him. And that happens a lot. And even if
Hmm.
it doesn't happen, he's got a trail of hurt children and a hurt spouse and a history that shows him to be a louse. That's my feeling.
Yeah. How'd you get so? How did you get inspired to do this book, the first one?
I had been
Because
doing,
you're
well,
happily married, like
I
150
am,
years.
I am. I had been divorced before
Oh, you
children.
had.
I had a
Oh.
short-lived, no children marriage, and I haven't seen this person in 30 years. I mean, this is not, luckily, if you have no children, as I said, you can sever. I've been married 38 years to my husband,
Hmm.
Michael. We have three grown children and five grandchildren. And I don't admit to being old enough to do that, of course. But but yes, I do have, thank God. And one of the things that we do is we smile at each other. It's a Jewish tradition to wake up and say a Hebrew phrase, Modeh ani lefanecha. In other words, it's a phrase that thanks God for bringing you out of sleep into a world where you have a possibility, where you have choices. Thank you, God, for this new day, that I get to do what I want, that I have agency. Because when you're asleep, you don't have agency. I mean, you don't know what's going on when you're asleep. And then you wake up and it's like, wow, I've got all this opportunity. And if you wake up with a sense of gratitude, then you're going to feel good. Now, you asked me, how did I get into this? I had been doing workshops at UCLA on deciding whether or not to have children and also deciding whether or not to get married. Those are two of my books. The one on marriage is called First Comes Love, Deciding Whether or Not to Get Married. And the other
When did
one
that
is,
come out? What year was that?
this was before I knew
I
my
was born.
husband. And yeah, before you were born, before I was born.
Just kidding.
Anyway, and then there was children to have or have not. Now, my PhD dissertation was a counseling, because it was in counseling, it was in psychology. It was a process whereby people could analyze the factors that go into having children, and then as a couple decide whether or not they want to go ahead and have children. And so I gave that at UCLA Extension, and it was wildly popular because the kind of person who's affiliated with UCLA is the kind of person who wants to analyze what's going to happen in their life. And so they had it all laid out, both the emotional and the logical aspects of having children. And most of them wanted to have kids, but wanted to feel good about it. And so they had it all laid out, and they went ahead and they had kids, and it was great. So then I started the one about deciding whether or not to get married. This book had just come out when I met Michael, my husband, and I made him, it has questionnaires and things in it, and I made him do them. Um, so yeah, we did get married, as you know. And the thing is that there are different considerations that people can go through logically and emotionally to decide if this is a commitment they want to make. And I think if people do, the more you put into the relationship, the more likely it'll be a commitment for life.
Mm-hmm.
So then how did I get into the divorce? That was the
Mm-hmm.
third topic. People were saying, okay, well, so what if we're having problems and we need help deciding about divorce? And I started researching it, and I saw there was no upside to divorce. There was only a downside. I looked at all the impacts, the financial impacts, the emotional impacts, the impacts on children, all the things. And it was like, I can't write a book on deciding whether or not to divorce because there's no choice. The only thing that's helpful for your life is to stay married. And so that became the case against divorce, and my whole career in terms of counseling, because people were coming to me having seen it. And yeah, that was how I built my whole career. And so then later, um, I decided to do this one, the more recent one, because there was all these new statistics, there was all these new studies. I'd had years of experience that I could put in stories of real cases and things like that. Um, but now I see divorce has no stigma. Divorce is, you don't consider it, you just do it.
Mm-hmm.
And people are put in positions where they just have to deal with it. And it's a whole different game. And it's very sad because our culture is suffering because there are not so many good role models for happy marriage. And
Mm-hmm.
therefore, there will be fewer people emulating that. And there will be fewer happy marriages and fewer individuals who get to have the happiness of having a soulmate. And I find that sad.
Very much so. Very much so. That's why I found your book so interesting. The Case Against Divorce. Yeah, so The Case Against Divorce is just uh, a phenomenal book. It was something that I was so happy to read because it hurts me to hear people say, "Oh, just divorce him." Oh, just and it's like, "What? Do you know what you're giving up? Do you know
Yeah.
what that who that hurts?" Like I like to say like children, like people who will say, "I would die for my children." And
Hmm.
you're going to
But they
divorce your
wouldn't.
wife?
Yeah,
No, they
they
would.
wouldn't.
They
No,
wouldn't
no,
die. They would say
no.
they would, and then
No,
they
and
divorce their.
they wouldn't stay in their marriage for their children.
Mm-mm. So
So, I
what do you
mean,
think about that? Staying in a marriage with somebody that you might not be in love with.
well, I think people shouldn't live their lives in pain or agony. I think they should work to fix the relationship. At one time, I keep saying it, I know, at one time they were in love. At one time they had a working relationship. They can, and they're different people now. I grant that. I'm not saying they can return and be who they were. I'm saying they can learn the skills. They can learn what will happify the other person. They can learn how to express themselves as the person they are. They can learn to accept the other person and even respect the other person. If the other
Yes.
person has problems, which obviously everyone does, then you can accept them for who they are and focus on their good points, focus on how they're working on the relationship, how they want it to work, how they care about your children. There's a lot of good in every person, and you saw good in that person years ago. So if you can not become that old person, but become who you are and let the other person also be who they are, then you can build a new relationship that has the benefit of all those years of history, of sharing a child or two or three, of having a home together. All that history is good. It's a basis for making a relationship into something that can be rewarding. But you have to do it with a mindset of not that, oh, I don't love him anymore, but I'm going to stay for the sake of the children. It has to be, we have problems that we're going to surmount, that we're
Yep.
going to work on, that we're going to overcome because our family is important and precious. And keep that, your eye on the prize. The prize is every day having a functional, happy, caring, supportive family.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can do that every day, one day at a time, then your life is going to be built up of days that are good, that are happy. And that's really all you want.
Yeah. No, I agree. Okay, so I found the text I was going to read to you. Hopefully, this woman won't mind. It's what her husband said. He said, because she said, I know you want to be happy, blah, blah, blah. And his response, this is the husband that wants to get divorced. He says, it's not about making me feel happy. It's about understanding what the rest of my life looks like. They have 3 kids. This limbo thing is not beneficial for anyone, and it feels like it's holding us back. If it's okay, I'm going to schedule our first meeting with the divorce lawyer, and I will let you know when it's going to take place. What do you say to that?
Not okay.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you want to keep your marriage, then you express that and you don't just let the other person slip away. I mean, no, no. I made a lifetime commitment to you. You seem to be trying to renege on that. Okay, I hear you. I understand that you're telling me it's about you and the rest of your life. You know what? We had a good life. We had a less good life, maybe, or maybe it wasn't that bad and you just met somebody else. Do you know what your life is going to be like with that person? That's a total unknown. That's a
So
total unknown.
let's have a conversation. So I'm going to be the husband, right? So I'm going to
Oh
say,
boy.
yeah, but I, I'm not happy at home. I want to be out there. I can meet anyone. I just want to be free to do what
Wait a
I want to do
minute.
because I want to stand up for myself.
Do you have someone? Is this a person who has someone or someone who just wants to cut free?
Oh, sorry.
What are we
Both.
dealing with
He
here?
has this lady, he has this lady. He doesn't know. He wants to live his life his way. He doesn't want to be
Chances
tied
are,
down.
yeah, chances are he has this lady. And she's like being demanding and saying, I don't like it that you're married. I don't like that. So, you got to cut ties there if you want to be with me. And she's so attractive and she's so achieving or whatever it is he wants. That's probably what's happening. Look, the truth is, I would, if I was the wife, but I'm not the wife. So are they in counseling? Are they with you? Are they sitting there
No,
with you and he's
she
saying this?
is. She is, but she
Only
tells me
her.
what he says. Yeah, and he's just like, but I don't want to be married. I want to be single. I want to be free. I did the marriage thing. It wasn't fun. I'm done.
Right. Okay. She should make it hard for him to leave.
Right.
She should say, I'm not ready to go to a divorce lawyer because I treasure our marriage. I think it's valuable and I think it can be rekindled. And there's no reason why we have to act hastily. And the rest of your life could be better in our marriage.
Mm-hmm.
We just have to see if that's possible. We have
Mm-hmm.
to give it a real shot. We
That's
have to
right.
give it you have to learn communication skills so that you feel that you're heard, that you feel that you're respected, and that we can have a two-way relationship. So, I mean, I wouldn't make it easy for him, but it sounds like in this case, he's out. It sounds like he's dumped her and he's trying to check boxes or give her reasons or what. It sounds like he'll do what she says just to say he's done it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what I hear in between the lines there. So, I mean, she may not have an option,
Yeah,
but
she might not.
still, but still, she should do what she can to prevent it.
Hmm. Well, one of the ways that I teach people how to prevent when the husband goes to mediation, mediation's a real cheap, quick thing. It's like, whoa, 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 let's go that route. So you can really see how much you're going to have to pay me if we go that route. And then they go, oh. It's almost like they get a chance to really see that they're going to be spending a lot of money on the divorce and on paying her. I've had people back out just because of the expense.
You have?
Hmm.
I see, because I haven't. Usually people, once they're out of there, once they've got another relationship, it's like, okay, whatever it takes, whatever I have to pay, I'll just, I'll try and get off with as little as possible, but let's just cut and run. I call this cut and run. This
Hmm.
is what a lot of guys do. It's like cut and run. The wife doesn't necessarily know what's going on, and then all of a sudden he sits her down or she finds out something, and it's like, oh yeah, well, actually, I'd rather be there. Cut and run. And there
Hmm.
they go. And no matter what it takes, even if it's expensive, it's going to be like, what's the most expedient thing? I'm out of here.
Hmm.
And then she's stuck. I mean, she doesn't have a choice because he's run.
Hmm.
He ran.
Hmm. Yeah, that does happen too. But if I can drag it out for a couple years, and after 2 years, the affair partner isn't so wonderful anymore, and he's starting to see that,
Right,
and he's
right.
looking
That's
at the
why I agree with
cost.
you. Yeah, no, I agree with you. Don't make it easy. Don't let them just go.
Yeah,
But
that's it.
yeah, but each
Don't make it
case
easy.
is different. But yeah, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
Because if the wife doesn't want the divorce, she has as much right to feel she doesn't want the divorce as he does to say he wants one.
Hmm.
She has as much power as he does, but she doesn't usually realize it.
Have you seen men implode their entire lives and cut and run, and then later kind of regret it? I know you were talking
Yeah,
about that in the beginning.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've seen people give up marriages of 32 years, 40-year marriages, and then they just chop and run and they say, well, I really want to be, this other person, this other type of person, this, I don't know, usually degraded person. Um, and then that doesn't work out. It's not satisfying. And their ex-wife is just like, that's it. She's moved on. She doesn't
Right.
want him anymore. She found out what kind of person he really is, and he hurt her to the core. And then he's stuck just being an old guy by himself.
Right. That's the scary part. But let me ask you a question. Was that really who he was? Was this guy who cut and run, was that really who he was? Or was that just some kind of addiction slash limerence slash I'm chasing a dream maybe a possibility to find my youth at this ripe old age of 60.
Yeah. I mean, look, he became that person. He became, what do you mean, who you are? Who you are is what you say and what you do. That's who you are. And if you murder somebody, you're a murderer. If you leave your wife, then you're a cut and run guy.
An
I
asshole.
mean, yeah, and okay, exactly. Exactly. But that's the whole point. It isn't like he's somebody else, really. He's really a good guy, but he just found this irresistible 18-year-old blonde. It's like, no, wait a minute. You're the guy who pursued the 18-year-old blonde, and that's who you are right now. If you want to be that guy, I have no control. But if you want to be somebody better, I can help you with that, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah. Such a crazy world. How did you stay married so long? Is it the religion?
No. Well, I mean, yes and no.
Waking up in
My
gratitude?
husband's a really great guy,
Yes, he is.
and thank you. And he's very generous. And he gives to people he has given money to people because he saw them looking sad. And he said, "Is there something wrong?" And then it ends up that they're in the hole, and he'll just give them money because
Mm.
it's a family, and the family was suffering. And he's just a generous person. And he's also really brilliant. So, I mean, I do respect him and look up to him.
Yeah.
And he's a really loving person. And so, any wife who has those three things is going to stay married because
Yeah.
you don't want to lose it. He is my soulmate, and I'm just very fortunate. So, how do I stay married? I'm happy. I'm happy with the guy I have. And he has his quirks. God knows he has his quirks. But, it's like, what matters?
Yeah.
The quirks are here, and who he is a really decent, caring, God-fearing person, and that's everything. The fact that he chews on toothbrushes, I don't care.
Shh. We won't tell.
He does,
Wait, but
and he
people have.
leaves them everywhere chewed. Oh, it's disgusting. But that's him. He's got his thing. He doesn't. Okay, I won't go into the litany of his quirks.
Right. But we all have something, right? We're all
Yeah,
weird in some way.
yeah,
Love
yeah.
you anyway.
But there are big things and little things. And in all the big things, he's wonderful. And
Hmm.
that's what you have to see in your spouse is
Hmm.
see the big things that are wonderful. And if the big things aren't wonderful, then you also have a role in supporting that person toward being better with those things
Hmm.
and discussing it and being there for them and talking about it and caring for them because that's what a spouse does. Someone who cares for you and wants the best for you and will
Hmm.
do what it takes to help you be your best you.
Hmm.
And so I feel that he does that for me. And I hope I have the privilege every day of doing that for him.
Wow. You're amazing. You're
Mm.
amazing, Diane. All right, I'm going to leave
You're
all of your
amazing.
books. Thank you. I'm going to leave all of your books in the chat part on this. So this is listed on YouTube and it will also be listed on Apple. So it'll be in the description for anyone listening to look there for some links so you can get all of Diane's books.
Thanks.
So, Diane, I love you. I'll see you in a couple weeks.
Love you too, Laurie.
Mwah.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so
Mwah.
much. Oh my God. How was that? Wasn't that amazing? Isn't she amazing? The thing about older people is they've already been through so much. If you see someone walking this planet who's an older person and they're married or they're divorced, ask them their story. And if they're talkative, please direct them to me because I'll have them on the show. Talk to people, ask them their input, how you can be better, what you can do about your marriage if you're struggling. If you're struggling, come to my website, thewifeexpert.com. Please share your story there. Reach out to me. I'm here to help you if you have a relationship problem or a marriage problem or your wife has left. I do all kinds of things like that because I want people happy. Everyone thinks their life would be better if they go like this. That is not the case, as Diane said. We know it. Divorce destroys people's lives, mostly yours. Do you want your life destroyed? No, don't get divorced. Get Diane's books, look below. All the links are there. Click subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Have a great week.